The cow example, which of these 4 animals is a farm animal? At one point, just for the heck of it, I Googled farm animals. And I can't remember the number now, but something like 12 million hits came up for farm animals. And the first one was the very top hit was a site called Farm Kids, which is made by educators, a really delightful site about farm animals. But as you work on it longer and longer, after about 20 minutes, it starts being really sludgy. And a pop-up comes up and says, little boys and girls, if your computer isn't working well, please ask your mom and dad to download Internet Explorer. It's a Microsoft product. It's a Microsoft product. And it's counting on people, on parents not spending 20 minutes on the site with their kids. But it's a product. So that made me realize we need a different kind of education system. One that allows 12 million possibilities, but also that makes us cautious about those possibilities that in fact are commercialized, that are stealing our data, that are privatized, all of those things that are what we did in the graduate class that Barry was in, called 21st Century Literacies. The kind of wacky things I do, I don't make syllabi anymore. In most of my classes, I start with a syllabus. By now, it's many generations of students who come up with them. We divide the class into teams, and each week, 2, depending on the size of the class, 2 or 4 students take the class. They decide whether they're going to use the syllabus, amend it, or get rid of it and start with something new. And now I have the kind of students who always get rid of what has come before. They set assignments, they grade, and these are my undergraduates. They grade the assignments, and then the students write course evaluations of how the teachers have done. And then those teachers go back to the students. So the whole class becomes about how you evaluate, how you take criticism and use it productively, how you give feedback productively. I also do contract rating, which freaks people out. In Barry's class, the 8 graduate students in the class were 2 Duke, 3 State, 2 Carolina?
1 Carolina, 3 Duke.
1 Carolina, 3 Duke.
No, half was Duke.
Half was Duke.
Yeah, then we had Jade, 2 Carolina,
Right.
then just me, Chris, and Elizabeth were at
So 8 graduate students, and they decided, I don't even know when, it was not my idea, that they weren't going to do term papers or research papers, they were going to write a book together on how to teach open learning. And that book is in a copy editor right now. It's the only class I've taught in my entire career where everybody got their papers in, finished, on time. 2 weeks after the class, we met again, and we had all edited each other's work. And we met to come up with a format. We're going to be publishing it on the Haystack website, on GitHub, on something called Rap Genius, where you can do some pretty cool online annotations. And as a Google Doc that people can make comments on, and I think we're going to do it as an Amazon book too. And once we decided it was an Amazon book, we decided it had to go to a copy editor because there's 8 of us, and it was a little hard. Yes?
Yeah, what you're describing, it sounds a lot like an experiential learning college, which has been going on for decades and decades.
Yep. Yep. Nothing new about it. Dewey was doing it in 1910, Montessori was doing it, absolutely. Just not very often that it's done. And it's certainly not done at most so-called Research 1 universities.
That's true. Yeah.
That's the part that freaks people out. Yeah. No, it's not much, no. There's nothing I'm doing about it, doing that's particularly new.
There's a little bit of movement in the, I'm a licensed K-12 educator, and so there's a little bit of that, ideas in that realm of education right now. They're slowly moving towards it.
Yep. And I think it's great. The more the merrier. My students are always harder on one another than I would ever think to be. They always make harder assignments. They're less tolerant of their friends screwing up. And all the research shows that peers actually perform at a higher level for peers than they do for parents or teachers. Peer pressure, right? I mean, that shouldn't surprise us. If you've ever been a kid or had a kid, kids tend to be very conscious of what their group thinks. I mean, it has to be structured. You don't just do it. I have to be serious about it. It's a lot more work than standing up and lecturing. Lots more work than standing up and lecturing. But it's really worth it. So the book that the class wrote together is on our ideas of open peer learning. So the first thing we did, for example, was took the Mozilla Manifesto and reworked it as a manifesto for open teaching. So we literally used that as a kind of a blueprint and thought about, okay, what are the rules we want as our community standards to make our classwork? So that's teaching. That's what I've been doing in teaching and what we've been doing in teaching. KSAC is an organization that it was basically a website. It's now got about 12,000 members. It goes in whatever direction people want it to go. I'd say mostly renegade humanists who have some coding experience, and some programmers who love the humanities, and then a new group of media artists or multimedia artists, or people interested in multimedia publishing, open source, new forms of multimedia publishing. And then we also run the MacArthur Foundation's competitions each year in digital media and learning, and those have different topics. The one we just finished, for 2 years we were working on badging, and now we've just started, actually we closed on Tuesday, our first competition, which we're calling Project Connect, which is open learning for young people to make a better web in order to make a better society. So it's apps for civil actions and civil organizations and community organizations, but apps that are smart apps that are also aware of issues of privacy and security and identity, and then have those affordances built into them. So we feel like you can't just build an app for society without also understanding the infrastructure of online life. And we've all gotten way too interested in Facebook and iPads that take away a lot of those options for us, which means they also take away a lot of the responsibility, which means they also take away, they give us a false sense of a security and safety that is not in fact there, especially in terms of persistent identity of young kids who may do something and many years later find out they're being jeopardized for something they did online much earlier. You don't have to be a kid to do stupid stuff online, as we would all know, right? But kids are especially vulnerable. So this is a project that's about teaching kids how to have roles in society, but also what that role is online as well. And so we just finished a competition for libraries and museums that we were hoping to get maybe 100 applications for, and we ended up getting 266 applications. Kind of amazing. Navajo Museum in North Dakota, small libraries all over America. Pretty cool stuff. I think I should ask questions at this point. I don't think people want to hear me just talk more. I can talk about any one of this, but I would really love questions.
Can you give us an example of how one would apply for a badge and how they're assessed for a badge?
Sure, that's a great one. Yeah, so we're working, one of the projects that we funded this year for badges is the Smithsonian Museum. And they said they have these kids that come on field trips, right? Kids go to Washington for field trips. And one of the PIs on this grant said, you know, I'm from Dayton, Ohio. We got on a bus and we went to Washington. And I went into one of the Smithsonian museums and said, I'm going to be a historian. This is amazing. And then he went to an art museum and said, wow, I'm going to be an artist. This is amazing. And then he went into the aeronautics museum and said, I'm going to be, an astronaut. And he was so excited. And then he went back to Dayton, Ohio, and went back to everyday life. The badge system they're doing, that they've developed, allows kids to go on, I'm going to call it a scavenger hunt, although they would probably not be happy that I use that term. It's more of an intellectual scavenger hunt. But it makes your field trip visit to Washington more interest-based and purposive, and shows you like how to get through, not shows you, leads you with a badge as the prize through a bunch of problems that you solve by going to the museums. I mean, there's hundreds of these topics. So you could take butterflies as a topic, but you could also take spying, let's say drones as a topic. And you can find your way through all these museums answering these questions, and you earn a badge from this. But the badge is metadata also that gets left there that other kids who've earned the badge can can connect with, and you can make online communities of people who've scored your level or other levels in that particular badge. So when you go back to Dayton, Ohio, you're not just going back, you're suddenly connected to other kids. And they can see what you did to earn your badge. And then they've got a whole series of other informal online learning lessons or games or plans that you can do that you can level up and earn other kinds of badges. And also, well, this is a part I just heard about. It's brand new, they've only been doing this about 6 months, but already kids want to be able to set tasks that other kids have to meet in order to get a badge, and then kids do the metadata and actually award a badge with the Smithsonian then authorizing the Smithsonian backpack. But if you click on the badge, it says this was authored by Tommy Jones in Dayton, Ohio, for this reason, on this date, and this is why I'm authorizing the badge. Now maybe that doesn't have as much credential as the one the Smithsonian curator offers, or maybe it has more. You know, it's pretty cool, because you just see the badge, but the badge always comes with its own, with transparent metadata that the institution certifies. And it has an institutional residence, but you can carry it around in your own backpack. So if I'm Tommy Jones from Dayton, Ohio, I might have a Smithsonian badge, but I also might have somebody else's badge that's on the same topic. Or I might go online and find a Coursera course on whatever my topic is and take a class in that and want the certification from that to be in my backpack. So pretty soon, all on my own, I've got a whole bunch of credentials in this field which show me getting better and better in whatever this field is. And they credentialize me in something I'm passionate about and interested in and self-motivated in. But normally, how would that, you would say in your college application, I like spies, or I like whatever the topic might be. I like whales. That's it. Suddenly now you have this whole world of things that really count in some way that's significant and that really could contribute and flesh out in a way that our, again, unfortunately, our formal accreditation systems miss pretty competitive. So there's many, we started with 30 institutions that have adopted badges, and each institution, and I do this in my classes, basically comes up with what it values and comes up with badges that you can take across the range of what its goals are and its values are. You get a badge from that institution, but when someone clicks on it, then suddenly you find all the metadata about why that badge was authorized, who authorized it, what the person did. So it authenticates. It's not like Johnny is good at X. It's actually a whole list of authentications of what they did.
So, is there something that technically requires an institution to be the arbiter of the value of a badge? Or can we have something just emerge through meritocracy of a bunch of people like this badge that I have?
Well, in Top Coder and Stack Overflow, it's more than that to meritocracy, but there's an implicit set of community standards if you're part of that. And also you're constantly peer-to-peer rating each other. So some of the institutions are more open, some are more institution-based, but there's a whole range, and you can make those decisions. But there are badges that you can do in a very, very peer-to-peer, without even that kind of institutional format. But you can. So, like for example, this is pretty cool. This year, my students turned a class that I taught with behavioral economist Dan Ariely into a MOOC. So their final exam was to take the lesson that the assignments they had done for us and turn it into something. We're working on doing the public interface for this right now. Turn it into something the public could learn from as a whole lesson plan. So the students actually created, in group support, created a lesson plan. Now, when you ask college students what they hate most, they'll say group work. Because usually it means one person is doing all the work for the other three, right? There's, some. So I had them, in the first set, I created the badges, basically a grid of qualities, and individually had them rate the other three people in their group. They could give no negatives. They only awarded a badge if somebody had done something great in things like fire starter, the person who's got the great idea at the beginning, or the implementer, or the creative force, or the good spirit. When the group is down, the person who somehow buoyed things up, things that are not, or C++ coding, WordPress development, technical skills as well. and intellectual ones, but a whole range of things that don't normally go together. Probably 20 categories. After they did those individually, then I and my apprentice instructors met in the groups of 4 with everybody, and we looked. And we said, are you seeing any patterns here? And in one of the groups, Mr. Big Man on campus, and he really was sort of the stereotypical big man on campus, looked. He's the only person in his group that nobody in the group had given any badges to. And I've never had this happen before. He turned his back on me, looked at the other 3 students and said, I have failed you. It won't happen anymore, but you've got to come up with something I can do to make up. This is week 4 of the class. I've been screwing up. You give me something I need to do. I will do it, and I promise I won't let you down. And he turned out to be a great leader, but later he came up to me and said nobody had ever told him before that he was mooching off everybody else. It's like kind of Mr. Charming, football player, you know, Mr. Fraternity, Mr. Cool, and very smart. Nobody ever told him that he was mooching. So it's that, you know, that's a very peer-to-peer use of badging. That I used in my class for my situation. The whole thing about badging is you have control over what you're going to do. And I love, this is from Top Coder, I love it that you don't have to say negatives. You only give a badge if someone merits one. So it doesn't matter. You look at someone's got 300 points and or 300 badges and someone's got no badges. No one had to say anything bad. You just go with the person who has the 300 points. Because it avoids trolls. It's a very simple way of avoiding trouble. It's not necessary. You just give points where it counts. You just give badges where it counts. Don't worry about the negative. Just do it where it counts. It's also a very interesting mentality in a world where we're constantly figuring out who's on top and who isn't on top. To just say, no, we want everybody to be excellent. And how do we get there? What do we need to do to contribute to all of us? How can we each contribute in different ways so we can be excellent, rather than who's going to fail? And sometimes the person who's the person who supplies the good spirits is the most important person in the group. And who knows that?
Can you contrast this notion of badges with other things that we might see in other contexts? For example, LinkedIn has a basically tagging system.
Yeah, I mean, there are, eBay, LinkedIn, Amazon all have recommendation systems. I think they're similar. And in fact, Reed, who owns LinkedIn, is on the Mozilla board and may be going to a badge system. It's a little more flexible, and it's a little more probably based more, the ones we're doing are more learning-based and more about learning and credentialing in alternative forms of learning than LinkedIn. But, and I must admit, I was one of those people who got hacked badly on LinkedIn, and I have not been back. I just really got, I was like, I don't want to do that anymore. So I'm not as conversant with LinkedIn as I probably should be. But my understanding is there's some, can you tell me?
Well, yeah, so just very briefly, the way that I have seen it function is that when you log in, you are presented with your peers that you have connected with, and you can either add free text tags of what their expertise is, or you can validate tags that other people have added. And occasionally, when other people have, more than one other person has validated you for something, you're prompted to either accept that and add that to your own profile, or reject it. So it's
pretty similar. There are a lot of
But
similarities.
probably the biggest difference is how much content there is. So there's a 1 to 3 word description. Like I can say, I know software development, and people just say, yeah, Justice knows software
And
development.
is there metadata that travels so that you can click on it and then find all the reasons people gave you? So that's the biggest difference.
right.
In Mozilla, it's open badge. In the OBI, we call it open badge, something or other. There's all the reason you give a badge is always there, including your footprint. So somebody can contact you and say, I just want to make sure that this is valid and you really did give this person a badge. So there's always verifiability built into it. So I think maybe that would be key. Thank you. It was a great conversation. Thank you.
So we've been talking about potentially doing badges within family Linux users group.
Oh,
We've got
interesting.
700 to 800 members,
Interesting.
many of which are very active on our mailing list with 10 to 30 recurrent themes. I'm curious what the startup effort is to become a badge arbiter as an institution. I would very much like to see it be something the members nominate what the badges are, along with what you were saying the
Yes.
Smithsonian was doing.
yes,
But for them to mean something, it sounds like as an institution, TriLUG would have to have some standard as to how we say, yes, that's a legitimate badge, and we're gonna put the TriLUG
What
stamp.
does that infrastructure look like?
although,
Yeah.
you know, interestingly, some organizations have decided not to, and have let the the ones kind of perk up and do leaderboards to decide which ones, you know, where people say, that's a great, yeah, I really need to know that about people, and others fall away, because they're just not very interested. I can put you in touch with Erin Knight, who's the person at Mozilla who is in charge of the OBI initiative, and she would be able to give you dollars and cents, and you'll know Linux very well, and your users group very, very well, in sense of being able to tell you what your institution could do. I'd be happy to do that.
Just on the surface, are you thinking it's 2 hours, 20 hours, 200 hours, 2,000 hours? What's it gonna take us to do this?
And us, where there were 700 people involved,
So we have a steering committee with 5 members, and we include additional volunteers to help us do the legwork. Probably not gonna be 700 people participating in starting it. Hopefully we'll get hundreds of them participating in doing it.
I think you could do a pilot and see how much interest there is, because the whole point is it does disserve your community, and you won't know until you try it in probably 15 or 20 hours. To get a pilot going that you could try and see if it's viable. And you'll know real quickly whether there's interest or not, or you'll either hear crickets or you'll hear a lot of excitement and interest.
Great, thank you.
And I've implemented the open badge infrastructure. I made a badge, I gave myself a badge. It's a, well, I mean, it's a test, Barry says, I mean, the evidence is there. I gave myself a badge after I learned how to give myself badges. But what I'm saying is that the protocol is actually better documented than most I've seen. It maybe took me, you know, an 8-hour day of work to, you know, build a server, debug it, learn JavaScript, and
Yes, you do have, well, it's not all JavaScript, well, the OBI is JavaScript. I know.
We have a lot of JavaScript.
Oh, you do?
Yes.
I have a research already.
I live in a world where JavaScript is like saying the devil or something.
Me too.
Yeah, some traditional computer scientists don't really believe the internet exists yet, so. Just saying, it's a battle I've had.
Have they accepted the novel yet?
No. You and the new, yeah.
So I was wondering, do you envision, like, assuming badges take off and are more widespread, do you envision this like being, like going back to his LinkedIn point, you know, institutions tying into sites like LinkedIn where, you know, you apply for a job, they go look at your profile and just see your collection of badges from various institutions across the world or whatever. You see that as being like the future of credentialing, or?
I won't be surprised. I mean, it certainly has worked well in the open source coding community. I don't know anybody who thinks the current system works. You know, recommendations, resumes, what do those words mean, right? You can take courses in how to write a resume, which is like not quite lying, but it's sort of like Congress's version of not quite lying. It's like, oh, wow, we've got some hairs we're splitting there to prove, on that border between lying and, whatever, it's a. So I think everybody needs this, and I don't know, a teacher, a kid, a parent, a principal, and if there's some in this room that want to disagree, but who think our end of grade standardized testing really measures intelligence, learning, content, skills, or is a motivator for learning. So in the education arena, I know, the dropout rate of students is a crisis. The dropout rate of teachers is a catastrophe. the dropout rate of teachers who are rated the best teachers by their peers after 5 years is like 75%.
Oh.
And testing is what is, if you say all the different, all the things, standardized tests. This particular form of standardized test is the #1 reason teachers give for dropping out of public schools.
3 weeks.
So I think something has to happen. Again, I don't know if badging is going to be it, but it's the best thing we've come up with because it's interoperable, it can be standardized and yet still customized, it has legitimation, it has more veracity than current systems, it has more flexibility, it can address institutional values. So if I'm a fundamentalist Christian school with certain kinds of values, those can be part of my badging system. Or if I'm the most progressive, radical, leftist school, I can have those kinds of values. And it doesn't, my institution can decide what counts as a value in my institution. And the metadata travels, so you can find out what that is. It's not one score, it's a complexity. So again, I don't know if it's a perfect system, but we've got to have an alternative. And this is the best I've seen so far. And I don't think it's just because I'm an evangel on behalf of the open source community, and I tend to think that lots of good has come from that world. But it worked. It worked. It's how the web was built. So there's a track record. So I think it's going to happen. I really, really do. And today's announcement with the Clinton Global Initiative is a pretty big deal. I think the BFD, to clarify his preference. Yeah. Yes.
I'm interested in how badging would work into encouraging, like, you're talking a lot about forcing people down one track or something. How it could encourage, like, somebody doing something unique on the fringe, where maybe it's, I see badging as having a lot of, we've already set down these tracks as badge areas, but what about that sort of on the fringe work?
Oh, that's
How
a
do we
great
roll with
question. With MacArthur, one of my favorite projects is we've set up these media centers, which is in libraries, often quite underused libraries, and they're so far mostly urban populations, and sometimes not even expensive technology, but enough technology and bandwidth that kids who don't have technology and bandwidth at home come to the library. They also all have books in them, and the first thing that blew us away with the media centers is higher book numbers of books being checked out than anyone had seen in 20 years. The second thing that blew us away with the media centers was not only were more kids coming in, but they were bringing in parents who had never been in a public library before. These are all public libraries. And the media centers, even before we did this big badge initiative, started playing with the idea of interest-based badging, where a kid could decide what they were interested in and collect badges by building up credentialing in that area, taking out books, finding stuff online, building projects, lots of maker stuff. Arduino, building robots, building, funny little anything, right? And could get a badge either from their peers or from the library in that. And that turned out to be tremendously motivating because kids who never thought that their weird little interests, comics, graffiti, that was one of my favorites. I judged one. Some kids at this, one of the branches of the Chicago Public Library in a pretty dicey area of Chicago invited me to come judge a comic book competition they did. And I'm not a comics person, but I was blown away. I was really blown away. And these were kids who would have thought that their interest in penmanship, because the comics were beautifully hand-drawn comics with the kind of really great calligraphy you'd see on a wall or on a bus or a school, that were then being used in these graphic novels they were doing. Kids suddenly realized this isn't some weird antisocial thing I do. It's a whole talent, and maybe even a career. And the badging helped them to make a resume of something so outside of any existing system. It helped them see, and that's where we found it. This was 2 years before we actually started the badging initiative. We found it was